Okay, this is the second part of children, families that I wanted to talk about. And the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of run over some basic concepts. We talked about least restrictive environment, LRE, in the last video. This time I wanted to just mention that communities are supposed to provide parents patriae, which really actually judges end up being the ones that do that, but they are supposed to represent the parent. They're supposed to make sure that the needs of the child are being met at communities, at through judges, making sure that families have financial assistance, housing, that they have access to food, fresh water, medical care. That is our job as a society, but it is in law as parents patriae. You may have heard in loco parentis, which is when sometimes parents, well, always when parents sign school permission slips, they're letting the school act in their behalf during that day or on that field trip. So that's called in loco parentis. They're acting in as parent for that time. There are three things. I'm going to read this. There's child abuse, child neglect, and there's emotional abuse. Physical abuse is a physical injury to a child, not accidental. It can be repetitive injuries that have healed. Often we find that parents' explanations of injuries don't match, and that's why that kind of comes up. They will find old injuries in x rays. Neglect, which is failure to provide for the basic needs or lacking supervision for a child. And emotional abuse is really a conscious attempt to harm a child emotionally by bullying them, threatening them, ignoring them, rejecting them, terrorizing them. The reality is we have 74 million children in the United States, and this is important. 74 million kids. 5.9 million of those 74 are reported as abused or neglected. About 60% of that 5.9 million actually goes to the point where they send a social worker out to investigate, which is about 3.4 million investigations. Of that 60% that they went out and investigated, only about 25% have the case open. So think about that. That goes down from about 74 million kids to 5.9 million that are reported. And out of those, about 800,000 or so actually end up having a case opened. Out of that, not as many go into foster care often as we think. It's about 9 out of every 1,000, but it's a big deal to that child who is in foster care. Children and youth right now, I told you in the last video, we have like 150 kids in foster care. I think we have about 2,800 families, though, that we have a case open for. So that's a lot of, sometimes it's checking in with them once a month to see how everybody is. And so that's important. So also wanted to run the term past you, CAC, which is a Children's Advocacy Center. We started to have one of these in Bucks County. Actually, in 1999, I was actually hired by NOVA, the Network of Victim Assistance, to set up and run a children's advocacy center. The idea is that it's like a living room atmosphere, or it could have a playroom atmosphere, and there is a two-way window in it. And a trained social worker interviews a child about abuse or neglect or emotional abuse, and this can also be sexual assault cases. And behind the window is another therapist, a detective, usually a police officer that originally came in on the case, a district attorney, and they are all watching to see if what the child is revealing is enough to have a case. As a side note, I got ready to open the place up, and the district attorney decided he didn't want to do it anymore, so they closed the Children's Advocacy Center before it opened. Nova had me do work with counseling for teens who had sexual assault cases instead. But many years later, like maybe 8 years later, it was able to be reopened, and it's still open today. And it does many, many interviews. It's really important. I think they actually have one in the lower end and one also up where Nova is in the Doylestown area. There's a term, battered child syndrome. Uh, it's rarely used anymore, but I think we can imagine. If we were in person, I would ask you What do you think the characteristics are of someone, an adult or a child, who is suffering from the effects, long-term effects of battered child syndrome? What are the things, what happens to a child who's been abused? What happens to one who's been neglected? I can tell you, I'm sure you can think of many, but difficulty regulating emotions, difficulty telling what their emotions are, describing them, often becoming withdrawn, sometimes exactly the opposite and acting out. There can be aggressive behaviors, inappropriate behaviors, sexual acting out behaviors. There's often a definite lack of self confidence, and particularly in school, if they aren't doing well, it can be even provoked more. So there's all kinds of things. Relationship forming and trust is, of course, going to be a problem for somebody who's had their parents neglect or abuse them. They haven't been able to have that basic trust that there should be, in the world. So, what are some reasons that people abuse their children or neglect their children? Why would that happen? We all are so excited to have a baby, and grandparents are excited. So, when these cases develop where there's been abuse or neglect, why? Lots of reasons are behind it. I am going to put this in, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm going to put this in the class, or this module. These are the 9 reasons that parents end up sometimes abusing or neglecting their children. In turn, I'm also going to give you like a quiz in there that I want you to tell me which of these reasons is causing that parent to act out. I'm asking you to complete it. If you complete it, I'm going to give you 100%. It doesn't matter to me if you get some wrong. I just want to know that you paid enough attention, that you tried to figure these out. And some are a little tricky, but basically I'm going to just go over them real quick so that you've at least heard them. So of the 9 reasons, the first one is that the parental role is unoccupied. This can mean that one of the parents is missing through death, through divorce, they're in prison, they're in the military. The child didn't have 2 parents, only had one. Maybe a parent is sick and in the hospital. It puts pressure then on that surviving parent, that single parent, and that can sometimes lead to unintentional abuse or neglect. Parental incapacity. This basically means that the parent is unable to be, due to physical or intellectual capacity limitations. They could be a special needs person who has had a child. They could have alcohol, drug addiction issues that are making it impossible for them due to the addiction to meet the needs of the child. Children born to children, sometimes that can happen. If a 14-year-old has a child, there's some immaturity still there. So that can be a reason why abuse or neglect can happen. Another is role rejection. And this is kind of when a parent, either intentionally or kind of in a passive way, tends to just be indifferent to their role. Perhaps they're just not looking at the children's homework or notes that come home from school. So they're completely unaware of it. They just don't even check. Perhaps they are completely involved. I don't know why this is sticking in my head, but like they're watching TV all the time, or they're watching football games and the kids are getting into trouble and dangerous behaviors because the parent is not acting like a parent. They're also all consumed in what their interest is at the time. Another one is intra-role conflict. This is when 2 parents have or it could be like a parent living with a grandparent, when there is a difficulty and a conflict on how they believe a child should be raised, how the child should be taken care of. And sometimes that conflict can end up leading to abuse and neglect. A lot of times that can happen when there's discipline issues and parents are fighting about that. There's also inter-role conflict, and this can happen when parents are having demands from their other roles. So, they're the demands from work. They're being forced to do overtime or something happens at work and they can't get home in time. Or when they get home from work, they are constantly on the telephone and unable to meet their child's needs. Or the stress from work, they're taking that home with them. There are role transition problems that can lead to abuse and neglect. So this could be a family moving, like they've lost all their formal support, military families that have to leave often, if somebody's marital status, if they when there's a divorce, often those stressful early days can be very difficult. Another reason for abuse are role boundaries, and this kind of tends to be when a parent's boundaries are either too loose or too tight. So too tight is they aren't allowing the child to have any exploration or any independence, and they're actually monitoring their behavior 24 hours a day. And you can imagine a very conservative, strict parent that could lead eventually to abuse or neglect, or a parent that has no role boundaries and where they're letting the child kind of be what we call parentified, maybe acting like the parent, raising the other children, having a 7-year-old heat soup for dinner is probably on the stove is probably not a great thing. A child's disability or incapacity would be the eighth reason that we see child abuse or neglect. Not at fault of the child, but the stress involved with the child that has a handicap or has an intellectual disability can lead to a parent being stressed, and that can lead to abuse. And the final reason, and an important one, the ninth, is a deficiency of community resources. So a child who's living in an area where there's not affordable housing, so the parents are living in a car, that's a problem. It's also a problem if they can't get to medical care. Perhaps they are living in a rural area and there is no medical care. That can end up leading to child abuse or neglect. Job loss. If you have a community where most of the community works in a certain industry and that industry suddenly shuts down, you can imagine that that could also lead to abuse and neglect. Like I was saying, this is going to be in the quiz is going to be in this module, and I want you to try to take it and try to. There'll be examples of family issues, and you can see and try to identify which one of those 9 kind of pressures were on the family that led to abuse and neglect. Just wanted to chat for one more second about, or a couple more minutes about this. Children and families today as a social worker. I began working as a social worker in 1984. Families looked very different then. They were more homogenous. They were more, white. What most in Bucks County is really what I'm picturing. It was mostly white, to a man and a woman parent, middle class. Things have changed drastically since then. Bucks County finally has some minorities here. We are only at about 6%, but we also see families that have LGBTQ members. We see families that have single parenting, right? So I just want to go over a few of those. The typical average, the way we picture families from the 50s and 60s seems to have changed a lot. Today, we actually have 33% of children who are with a single parent. It's actually 34% are with their moms, and 6% of children are with their dads. One of the good things we see is that the teenage birth rate of teenagers having babies is declining, and we do see single women who are having their babies without a parent is definitely on the increase. I said this before, but we have the feminization and juvenilization of poverty because more women and children are in poverty than before. When we work with single families, social workers have to keep a couple things in mind. We need to remember that there's stress, that there can be parentification from those children, that sometimes single parent, female or male, have to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. So we have to often work with that parent to help them negotiate their time and their boundaries and make sure that they can make time to have their children's needs met, but also their own. We also see a lot of blended families today. Maybe many of you are in a blended family. So that's when the parents have children from different relationships or previous relationships. Mom may have been married and had 2 kids. Dad is married with 1 child, and they are blending. So that's a whole different thing. What are some of the issues that come up? Think about that with a blended family. This instant family that gets together doesn't mean that there's all harmony all the time. There can be sibling rivalry. There can be issues between the parents coming differently and having disciplined their children that they brought to the marriage differently than they're going to discipline together. Kids can have a fantasy about what the family should have been like if there was a divorce and now there's a blended family. Sometimes they idealize the parent they're not living with, and that can be difficult for the parents that they are living with. So social workers try to keep all of that in mind as they try to help families negotiate the emotional consequences of both divorce and blended families. Today, we also have gay parent families, which was illegal at one point. Actually, the NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, joined a lawsuit, I believe it was in 2006, in defense of a gay family who was raising a foster child. The foster child was removed from them and put back with its abusive grandparents, and I think this was in Illinois, because that family was gay. It went up to the Supreme Court, NASW, and a lot of groups got involved, and the Supreme Court said no, it was okay for that child to be with a gay family. We are not finding in any study that being raised in heterosexual or any LGBTQ combination doesn't affect children. What children need is love. So they aren't seeing it even affects what the children's sexuality is, that there's no impact there. We do find that this can be different in how, and this is where social workers can come in. Some kids who have two mothers or two fathers can in some instances, get feedback in school, sometimes be bullied, have comments made. I find that as time goes on, that happens less and less and less, but it also depends on the community. There are communities in Bucks County that are more accepting of LGBTQ, and it's a more common phenomenon than in others. So it's just something for, like, especially if you were a school social worker, to keep an eye on that can happen at school. I also wanted to mention, we have not a lot of minorities in Bucks County, but we do have some, and we have we have immigrational issues that have led to intergenerational differences as families adjust to living in America. Just thinking about those children and how they are at risk if their parents speak a different language than teachers, if the children speak English and they are used to interpret on behalf of their parents, if the parents are struggling at all with adjusting because maybe they're new to this country to cultural changes and things, learning a whole new system of life, of currency, of transportation, of medical care. There's a lot of work there for social workers to help people adjust when that happens. I also want to say that I have seen another change, and that has been grandparent families. And a lot of this came out of the opiate crisis. As people, lost their lives in drug addiction, grandparents have taken over as parents. And that's another really important issue for social workers, because if you were here, I would ask you, what do you think that's like for the grandparent? Right? They maybe are thinking of retiring. They're thinking that this is the years they're going to travel, and now they are back in elementary school again, supporting children. Maybe they didn't put money away to be raising children, and so now in their senior years, money's really tight. They may be tired. So social workers need to be aware of those things and be able to support grandparent families so that they are able to meet the needs of their children. So that's all I wanted to say today. Make sure that you get that quiz done in there so I can give you a good grade on that. And thank you very much. Bye.